Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And I'm sure you're all anxious to return to the book. This book that we're reading currently here on Inquisition Update is entitled The Global Vatican. You ever want to know what the New World Order is? This Roman Catholic, a former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, is going to tell you what the New World Order is about. Not explicitly, but the inference is clear. This book is prefaced with an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. And that unholy union between the United States and the Holy See is described Revelation chapter 13. The sea beast and the wilderness beast. The first beast and the second beast. The second beast causes the whole world to worship the first beast. The first beast being the papacy that rose up in the seas of people in Europe. And then the second beast, the wilderness beast, rises up out of the wilderness, is a comparatively unpopulated area in comparison to Europe. And it rose up second, and it causes the whole world to worship the first beast, the papacy. Now, we concluded with a discussion about the First Continental Congress expedition to Canada to enlist Roman Catholic Canada's support against Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. And now we'll proceed to part 4 of the first chapter of this book, entitled The Greatest of Evils to be Feared, which is actually a quote from Sam Adams concerning popery. According to Sam Adams, popery was the greatest of evils to be feared. And why is the papacy the greatest of evils to be feared? Because he calls himself the replacement of the Son of God on earth, and he also claims divine right to rule all the governments of the world, and that every government of every nation is a servant to the papacy, not the people. Okay, and Rome justifies this in many ways, one of which is an acknowledged forgery, that is the donation of Constantine, the emperor of the old Roman Empire, bequeathed, apparently, but it's a forgery, bequeathed the right to govern to the Pope, to govern the whole world, not just Europe. And this is the basis of the global papal power. Again, the title of the book is The Global Vatican. All right. Now, beginning part 4 of the first chapter of this book, it says, the mere fact that Charles and John Carroll had stuck out their necks for the American cause was evidence that their religion, whatever its perceived flaws, produced good and reliable patriots. Now, I want you to take note of what the definition of patriotism is in the minds of a Roman Catholic. Patriotism is service to the Pope, and America is to serve the Pope. And America, the Jesuit mission called America, was to separate itself from Protestant Great Britain. Now, you and I have a concept of patriotism, but most of us don't factor the Pope into our definition of patriotism. But every Roman Catholic, bound by Roman Catholic canon law, is under the constraint that all lands must serve the Pope, that every human person must be subject to the Roman pontiff. Okay, he must be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And if there's any land in the world where the Pope does not control the government, then it must eventually, by whatever means, fair or foul, be overthrown. And that overthrow was the Revolutionary War. It happened early in our history. Now, people are looking for a future Antichrist, and that's why they're oblivious to the truth. That Antichrist has ruled from Rome and steadfastly and steadily gaining control, more and more control of the government of the United States, until America has literally become a papal state, has literally fulfilled its prophetic role as the second beast that causes the whole world to worship the first beast. Now, he says, over the next several years, many more Catholics would give their hearts and lives to the cause of liberty. What is liberty to a Roman Catholic? Freedom to be Catholic. Freedom to make America Catholic without opposition. Okay, over the next several years, many more Catholics would give their hearts and lives to the cause of liberty, proving themselves to be as American as any Protestant. Do the Protestants want the Pope to rule the country? Absolutely not. They believe he's Antichrist. So what is there in common between Protestants and Catholics that even if you wanted to call it patriotism, there's nothing in common? Patriotism to a Protestant is one thing. Patriotism to a Catholic is far different. Okay, it's not liberty at all. It's being bound, ball and chain, to a papal government, and to be governed by Roman Catholic canon law in the form of civil law. That's the objective of this Carroll family. That's the objective of Francis Rooney. That's the objective of the papacy. That's the objective of the Jesuits, to make America Catholic. And of course, if you don't go to the Roman Catholic Church, they really prefer that you do. But if you don't, why, as long as you're obeying the civil law, which is canon law, Roman Catholic canon law, then you're by nature and by government a Roman Catholic. And that's the way they see it. Oh, by the way, something else I haven't talked about yet is a dogma in the Roman Catholic Church that goes like this: everything to the church and everything from the church. In other words, everything goes to the Roman Catholic Church, and then everything is redistributed by the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, that includes faith and morals, and, everyone owes their spiritual well-being to the Roman Catholic Church, and then the Church redispenses grace and indulgences and all these other things. Everything to the church and everything from the church. Now, since it would be virtually impossible for the Catholic Church or the papacy to receive all the goods and then dispense it, there's only so much a man can, there's only so much a pope can do in a day. So he has to have the help of the civil government. So in actual practice, it's everything to the government, as long as it's papally controlled, and then everything from the government. Isn't that what we have today? Roman Catholic canon law enforced upon us, even by our very form of government. Taxation till the point where we can't even make a living. And then, of course, we have all these entitlements that bind us. Whether we like the government or not, we depend on that government for our Social Security and for retirement, for health care, and for, everything. You can't buy a food item in this country that doesn't have a universal product code on it. So it's been through the government's hands, which is the agent of the papacy. It's been through the government's hands. It comes from the government. Everything is controlled by the government because the papacy controls everything. through the government. The government of the United States is the servant of the papacy. And you thought the Antichrist was future. Now, over the next several years, many more Catholics would give their hearts and lives to the cause of liberty, proving themselves to be as American as any Protestant. Eventually, of course, America would ask France, a Roman Catholic nation, for help. The victory at Yorktown in the autumn of 1781, and more generally, independence itself, would never have been possible without the support of nearly 8,000 Roman Catholic French troops and Admiral de Grasse's blockade, according to this author. Yorktown was still very much in the future in the spring of 1776, but the Carrolls returned from Canada to a land already undergoing extraordinary changes, some of which would have been inconceivable in the colonies even a few years earlier. That July, Charles Carroll joined 55 other Americans in signing the Declaration of Independence and endorsing these words, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," unquote. What does the Bible say? I know the Declaration of Independence is very important to many Christians. But what does the Bible say? We are all born in trespasses and sins. That's how we're equal. We're all born in trespasses and sins. But some of us will have our sins forgiven, blotted out, washed white as snow. Now, does that washing come from a man with a funky fish head hat and little red shoes, sitting on a white marble throne in the gold room, in the yellow room in the Vatican? Or does it come from the one who died for us? There is a difference between the two. One is Christ, a sacrifice for us, and one who kills in the name of God. See the contrast? No comparison. No pope ever died for anyone else. The papacy has soaked the earth with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. You see the contrast? Yorktown was still very much in the future in the spring of 1776, but the Carrolls returned from Canada to a land already undergoing extraordinary changes, some of which would have been inconceivable in the colonies even a few years earlier. That July, Charles Carroll joined 55 other Americans in signing the Declaration of Independence. Remember, Charles Carroll wasn't even allowed to vote, wasn't allowed to practice politics, or practice Roman Catholicism, wasn't allowed in politics. Here he was on a mission to Canada. First Continental Congress sent him and his cousin, a Jesuit priest, and a Freemason, Benjamin Franklin, and some other people up to Canada to get some support. Then he comes back and he signs the Declaration of Independence. I mean, there wasn't freedom of religion for Charles Carroll, but he helped found the government. Interesting. How did he get such power and authority being a Roman Catholic? He says, in July, Charles Carroll joined 55 other Americans in signing the Declaration of Independence. Independence for what? Protestant Great Britain. See, this is a win-win situation for the Vatican. A win-win situation for Charles Carroll and Daniel Carroll and John Carroll, the Jesuit priest who would become the first bishop of the Roman Catholic Church in America, the founder of Jesuit Georgetown University. Statues erected in his honor. Little is known among Protestants about these Carrolls. Why is that? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This author's claiming those to be Roman Catholic words. After all, Charles Carroll endorsed them. As the only Catholic signer, Carroll could not endorse that passage without understanding very personally what these unalienable rights entailed. Freedom to worship as he saw fit. You know what the Revolutionary War was? It was a defeat for Protestantism. But the Bible does tell us that the wheat does grow up with the tares. The problem for all of us is to determine, since they look so much alike, what is wheat and what is tares. And I highly recommend Chris Pinto's video series called The Wheat and the Tares. Wheat Among the Tares. It's free online if you care to Google the title. Tares Among the Wheat, Tares Among the Wheat. Very, very important video documentary. I hope every one of my listeners watch it. Watch it at least once. Now, right up until the Revolution, no colony, with the exception of Pennsylvania, had allowed Catholics to celebrate Mass. Mass was out of the question in the colonies. Later on, Pennsylvania gave in, and that started a landslide, especially after the Revolutionary War. He says, now, one by one, the former colonies began passing laws that extended to Catholics full rights of citizenship and religious freedom. That's right, they weren't even regarded as citizens. Why? Because everybody knew, anybody that knew anything about Roman Catholicism, the real citizenship of a Roman Catholic is Rome. The first loyalty to a Roman Catholic is Rome and to his King of Kings in the Vatican, the papacy. But now, grudgingly or not so grudgingly, now the Catholics of this country are regarded as full-fledged American citizens, and they have full religious liberty. Freedom to practice Catholicism. What is the practice of Catholicism? To do everything in your power to make the Pope the king of the land. And that's by passing laws consistent with Roman Catholic canon law, of which the popes are the authors. Now, as the constitutional scholar Leo Pfeffer points out in his book, Church, State, and Freedom, the Americans were practically forced by their own logic to grant religious freedom. They could not insist on self-evident and unalienable rights while denying some fellow citizens that most self-evident of unalienable rights, the freedom to worship as they pleased. Quote, thoughtful persons could not fail to see the inconsistency, Pfeffer writes, between the practices of religious discrimination and the natural rights doctrines of freedom and equality set forth in the Declaration of Independence, unquote. 189 years, listen to this carefully now, 189 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Second Vatican Council would pass its own breakthrough declaration on religious freedom known as Dignitatis Humanae. The Catholic Church, having deemed itself the only legitimate religion on earth for centuries, finally in 1965 recognized other religious faiths as worthy of respect and freedom of worship. You know, he makes a very, very appropriate link between the Declaration of Independence and Vatican Council II, the ecumenical council which literally laid down the gauntlet to Protestants. For over 200 years, you Protestants have believed in a future Antichrist, and thereby you have exonerated the entire history of the papacy. in effect, you have renounced your Protestant rebellion because it was based on the belief, the universal belief, that the papacy was the Antichrist. And now, having recognized your error and having repudiated your Protestantism by your belief in futurism, now you owe it to the Roman Catholic Church, you owe it to God to come back to the Roman Catholic Church and to help restore everything that the Protestant Reformation stole from the papacy. The legitimate vicar replacement of Christ on earth, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the only voice in the world that resounds in heaven. You see, Protestantism is, well, that's why nobody even knows what Protestantism is today. And nobody understands the importance of Vatican Council II. It was an ultimatum. You either come home to Rome, you either come home to the Roman Catholic Church, you obey the papal law, you help fight to restore everything that the Vatican lost during the Protestant Reformation, or else. And that else is called the New World Order. And Rome is going to rule once again with a rod of iron. Anyone who dissents after having surrendered at Vatican Council II, after having laid down their Protestant sword, after having renouncing their belief, their former historical, prophetic, and biblical belief that the papacy was, is, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible, they've laid down their swords. Now they're committed. We made a mistake. Martin Luther was wrong. William Tyndale was wrong. All the Protestants were wrong. They all died in vain. They all proclaimed Christ, but they died assailing the very throne of Almighty God in Rome. That's the logic behind futurism. That was the logic of Vatican Council II. And that was also the logic of the Revolutionary War. Vatican Council II was a result of the Revolutionary War. We fought against Protestantism, side by side with Catholics. And they call it patriotism. It's unbelievable what has happened. So the papacy, trying to outdo the framers, wrote an encyclical, Dignitatis Humanae, the dignity of humans, right? He says, drafted by an American Jesuit named John Courtney Murray, Dignitatis Humanae would be a striking case of America's experiment in democracy influencing Catholic thought. Wonderful, isn't it? The blindness that is America today. Fulfilling its prophetic destiny as the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. And few comprehend what its real role in the world is. We'll be back right after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you wish to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And we thank Brother Nicholas and First Amendment Radio for the opportunity to serve in this fashion. A note from a listener reminding me that the Revolutionary War was literally part of the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. Its whole intent was to destroy Protestantism, to destroy the Reformation. Again, the Revolutionary War was not about tea and taxes. That was the cover. The real issue in question in the Revolutionary War was, will America be Protestant, as was England, or will it be Catholic? The Jesuits here in this country, most notably John Carroll, and the Jesuits in England, got together to influence the Protestant Freemasonic Parliament in England and cooked up all these intolerable acts to foment the revolution. But their object was religious separation from England and religious unity with Rome. Granted, it was going to take a great deal of time. The colonies were overwhelmingly Protestant, and it had to be done without exciting their Protestant fear and hatred of the papacy. But eventually, if they were patient, if they bide their time, if they followed the instruction, if they followed the instructions of their Jesuit masters, well, they would arrive at what we're experiencing today. A nation that calls itself Protestant but doesn't even know the definition of it, and is really Roman Catholicism. It's become a Roman Catholic nation. Now, 189 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Second Vatican Council would pass its own breakthrough declaration on religious freedom, known as Dignitatis Humanae. The Catholic Church, having deemed itself the only legitimate religion on earth for centuries, finally in 1965 at Vatican Council II, recognized other religious faiths as worthy of respect and freedom of worship. Drafted by an American Jesuit named John Courtney Murray, Dignitatis Humanae would be a striking case of America's experiment in democracy influencing Catholic thought. Remember, it was Suarez and Bellarmine and what was the other one? Thomas Aquinas, the demonic doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, who cooked up democracy, governments of, by, and for the people. See, Rome even claims credit for our form of government, and we thought it was Protestant. Long before church leaders learned about liberty from America, though, the American founding fathers were learning such lessons from the Catholic Church, says this author. To be sure, the founders' debt to the Church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church, was an inherited one, which they probably didn't even know they owed. Thomas Jefferson credited his influence for the Declaration to John Locke, the English philosopher who despised Catholicism so intensely that he neglected to include it as a religion deserving toleration. Jefferson had his own concerns about the Roman Catholic Church, considering it anti-democratic, and why wouldn't he? I mean, the whole history of the Roman Catholic Church is monarchical. The Pope being the monarch of monarchs, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Here's what Jefferson said, quote, "History, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government," he wrote to Alexander von Humboldt on December 6, 1813. Nonetheless, Jefferson joined James Madison and other founders in composing a constitution that extended freedom of worship to all religions, including Catholicism. And what was one of their main motivations? All these Freemasons wanted to have religious liberty themselves, to worship Lucifer. And if you've read Morals and Dogma, the literal Bible of the Roman Catholic or the Freemasonic order, it's an acknowledgement that they worship Lucifer. They worship him by many names, but they are indeed worshiping Lucifer. And of course, that would not be tolerated in a Protestant land. Now, the founders recognized, as John Locke never did, that the logic of human rights demanded the acceptance of full religious freedom. Bringing this full circle, if the founders owed their inspiration to John Locke, Locke himself probably owed more to influences that preceded him, Catholic influences, that is, than he would ever have admitted. The renowned medievalist scholar Brian Tierney has shown that precedents for natural rights theory go back to 12th century canon law and include Aquinas' expression of the social compact of the consent of the governed, noted earlier. From these evolved the modern concept of God-given, self-evident rights possessed by all individuals by virtue of their being born human, and which all humans can recognize by virtue of their capacity for reason. Now, let me tell you something about the Roman Catholic Church definition of what it is to be human. To be truly human is to be subject to the Roman pontiff. If you rebel and withdraw your subjection to the holy pontiff, you are no longer truly human. Okay? So it's very important to know how Rome defines her terms. Continuing, he says, among the Lockean-sounding ideas considered in earlier Catholic theology, particularly by Jesuit thinkers, were first, that rulers rule by the consent of the ruled, and second, that rulers themselves are subject to the rules of natural law. American ideals, in other words, may owe more to Catholic thought than most of us recognize, for the simple reason that Western thought was Catholic thought for millennia. This was the philosophical and theological tradition from which John Locke's and then Jefferson's ideas arose. I'm hardly the first person to notice commonalities between the Declaration of Independence and Catholic theology. In the 1920s, at a time when anti-Catholicism was flaring up yet again in America, a number of Catholic scholars attempted to polish their patriotic credentials by making the case that the Declaration of Independence was shaped directly by the Catholic tradition of natural law. Some even suggest that Thomas Jefferson had read Catholic literature. The evidence for this seems thin. Nevertheless, Jefferson's words are strikingly similar in some cases to those of St. Thomas Aquinas and Robert Bellarmine, to name just two. In 1930, a Catholic priest named John C. Rager made the comparison explicit in a side-by-side comparison. One of these concerned the natural rights of humans. Here's what Rome put side by side. Listen to this. Thomas Jefferson in the 18th century said, quote, "All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights," unquote. Now, here's Jesuit Robert Bellarmine, who wrote in the 16th century, quote, "All men are equal, not in wisdom or grace, but in the essence of and nature of mankind," unquote. Now, here's the demonic doctor Thomas Aquinas, who wrote in the 13th century, quote, "Nature made all men equal in liberty, though not in their natural perfections," unquote. Another of the comparisons concerned governments. Jefferson said in the 18th century, quote, "Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed," unquote. And Robert Bellarmine, the Jesuit priest in the 16th century, says, quote, "It depends upon the consent of the multitude to constitute over itself a king, consul, or other magistrate. This power is indeed from God, but vested in a particular ruler by the counsel and election of men," unquote. And here again, the demonic doctor Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, says that, quote, "Therefore the making of a law belongs either to the whole people or to a public personage who has care of the whole people," unquote. Now, I'm going to stop and interject something. In Roman Catholic canon law, the papacy is regarded as the keeper of the saints, the keeper of the souls of men. Okay? And I'm here to tell you that whatever public personages are elected in our form of government to be the caretakers of the whole people can only do so if he gets his legitimate power from the papacy. The papacy only delegates this power to others. No one can exercise it on their own without the papacy's approval. That's Roman Catholic canon law. Now, does the fact that many of Jefferson's arguments and phrases echo Catholic theology mean that the Declaration of Independence was in origin a Catholic document? Certainly not, says the author, but clearly that was his implication, right? Clearly that was his implication. It ultimately evolved from Roman Catholic teaching. But it's not a Roman Catholic document, according to this author. Certainly not, he says. Neither the founders, who were mostly deists, nor the Vatican, which had little sympathy for revolutions or democracy or Enlightenment thought at the time, would have been comfortable with that description. Nonetheless, the similarity should be recognized, if for no other reason than to highlight the irony and the absurdity of what followed. Rather than find common ground and join forces, the United States and the Vatican spent the next 150 years caught up in a web of prejudices and suspicions. Anti-Catholicism would continue to cast a shadow in America deep into the 20th century. That was marked by Vatican Council II. That's when the suspicions and prejudices against Roman Catholicism ended. It ended in ecumenical unity. And he says it was, according to the historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Sr., which is not to be confused with his son, Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., who served as aide to John F. Kennedy, America's first Roman Catholic president, quote, the deepest bias in the history of the American people. Anti-Catholicism was the deepest bias in the history of the American people. And I'll bet you that the vast majority of my listeners are hearing that for the first time in their life. Many of you have lived 50, 60 years and have never once realized that the deepest bias in the history of this American people was its bias against popery, against the Antichrist, the Pope of Rome. And many of you will be irretrievably convinced in a future Antichrist, and as long as you continue to believe that, you are still subject to receive a false Christ. Meanwhile, the Roman Catholic Church was about to undergo a jolt, making it even more wary than it already was of the democratic ideals from which the American experiment had sprung. Those are the closing words of chapter 1 of the book, The Greatest of Evils to be Feared. In early colonial period, the greatest of evils to be feared was popery, Roman Catholicism. My, how times have changed. Chapter 2 of this book is entitled The Last Pope. It begins with a quote from Thomas Babington Macaulay. He says, "When we reflect on the tremendous assaults which she has survived, we find it difficult to conceive in what way she is to perish." I only suggest, Thomas Babington Macaulay, that you read your Bible. It speaks of the destruction and the judgment of the great whore in Revelation chapter 17. The author begins by saying, as consequential as the American Revolution would be to world history and to the future of the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See... Whoa, back up. Wait a minute. What did he say? As consequential as the American Revolution would be to world history and to the future of the Roman Catholic Church, plainly telling you the future of the Roman Catholic Church hinged upon the American Revolution. Don't let these words slip past your recognition. This author, an ambassador of the United States to the Holy See, clearly states that the American Revolution determined the future of the Roman Catholic Church. Do you remember what it said in Revelation chapter 13? The second beast causes the whole world to worship the first beast. Now, this author is just telling you that the United States, the American Revolution, which became the United States, a Roman Catholic nation that serves the papacy, that has conquered the rest of the world for the Pope and has caused the whole world to worship the first beast, is plainly the champion of the Roman Catholic Church. And why is America the champion of the Roman Catholic Church? Because in the Protestant Reformation, Rome had lost everything. 1517. Martin Luther started a rebellion against Antichrist. Recognized the papacy as Antichrist. Said so himself in all of his writings. And all the Protestant reformers agreed. To the man, every one of them. It was a universal belief. It became Protestantism. All the governments were overthrown. Governments subservient to the people were installed. The papacy was dying. The papacy couldn't collect taxes anymore. The papacy couldn't control the kings anymore. And if he couldn't control the kings, he couldn't control the people. At the very time when it appeared that the papacy was toast, literally dying of loneliness in the Vatican, penniless, no power, no respect, no help from anyone, the Carroll boys are fighting to create a single combat warrior nation for the papacy. For all intents and purposes, the papacy was toast in Europe. Sure, she had some adherents in France and Italy and Spain and Portugal, but they were all in rebellion too. What hope did the papacy have? America, the wilderness beast, rose up in the wilderness, just as the sea of people that used to worship the papacy were now worshiping Jesus Christ and Him only. The papacy even said, I believe it was Pope Pius IX, he said, I am Pope nowhere in the world except America. Now, recently I've had an acquaintance tell me that the United States is not the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. I'll let history, prophecy, the scriptures bear witness. Again, he says, as consequential as the American Revolution would be to world history and to the future of the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See seemed to give it little thought as it was occurring. This is not all that surprising when we consider the number of Catholics in the distant American colonies. Just 25,000 comprised a small fraction of the Vatican's flock of more than 100 million, and that the regime from which America were attempting to break, Britain, was Protestant and historically at odds with the Holy See. The Pope at that time, Pope Pius VI, had more important things on his mind than a Protestant dispute more than 4,000 miles from Rome. I differ with this author. I believe the Vatican knew what the Jesuits were doing in America. I believe they pretended the destruction of the Jesuits, the suppression of the Jesuits, the extinction of the Jesuits by a papal bull as just being a public ruse so the Jesuits could go underground and do their bidding. And I've got a little book right there in my library. I'm looking at it. It's called Our Flag. And it's written by a man by the name of Campbell. And one of these days I'm going to read it here on Inquisition Update. He asserts that the Jesuit general at that time, of the suppression of the Jesuits, was right here in the colonies and advising the new government, designing the flag, the wording of the Declaration of Independence and all that. Francis Ritchie, okay? Stunning information, and I can't wait to get to it. I wonder if Francis Rooney knew anything about Lawrence Ritchie being in this country when he was supposed to be in prison at the Vatican. Anyway, it says there's an intriguing story, I've never been able to confirm it myself, that suggests that Pope Pius VI was at least mildly interested in the events in America. He apparently asked his nuncio in Paris, Giuseppe Doria Pamphili, to procure a copy of the Declaration of Independence from Benjamin Franklin, a Freemason. See the close relationship? This would have occurred about 2 years after Pius became Pope, early in 1775, and a short time after Franklin landed in Paris in 1776 to solicit French help, Roman Catholic France's help for the American cause. Franklin apparently obliged the nuncio. Yes, most Freemasons do oblige their Jesuit masters. Franklin apparently obliged the nuncio, and a copy was delivered to Rome. Okay? Confirmation to the Pope that Lawrence Ritchie was doing his job very well. Now, if Pope Pius VI did in fact receive a copy of the Declaration, how ironic it would have been for him to read it in the light of one of the great windows of the Quirinal Palace, the residence of the popes until 1870, and the ultimate symbol of monarchism. One might imagine Pope Pius VI, an Italian deeply schooled in the Old World Europe, that was the Old World Order when the popes ruled supreme over the kings of the earth. That was before the wilderness beast stood up. That was before the papacy lost all of its power. One might imagine Pope Pius VI, an Italian deeply schooled in Old World Europe, carefully sounding out these distinctly New World words. New World Order words. Quote, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and the nature's God entitled them, unquote. Quite likely the Pope's reaction would have been mixed. He would have applauded the Declaration's implicit promise of religious freedom for Catholics in America. He would have approved, too, the hints of Catholic natural law sprinkled through the document. But other parts would have troubled him. Whatever it shared with Catholic theology, the Declaration of Independence was unmistakably a product of the Enlightenment. And the Catholic Church in 1776 was far from ready to embrace Enlightenment thought. Behind Thomas Jefferson's eloquent phrases were the inimical words of John Locke, the same John Locke who attacked the Roman Catholic Church in England with his 1689 treatise entitled Letter Concerning Toleration. The same John Locke who argued that all religions should be treated with toleration except Roman Catholicism. In league with Locke's ideas were the disturbing provocations of Voltaire, Hobbes, and a host of other skeptics, rationalists, empiricists, and freethinkers who embraced the age of reason and disparaged the Roman Catholic Church. While the philosophers of the Enlightenment inflicted their wounds by pen, then by sword, the injury was real. They steadily undermined the authority of the Church and the faith of its flock, making room for secularism to grow and giving Europe's monarchs license to wrest religious control from Rome. Later, Enlightenment ideas would haunt the monarchs themselves. Momentarily, the decline of faith left a gap. A power abhors a vacuum. Government moved in to fill it. The worst offenders were the Catholic monarchs. The Bourbons in Spain and France, the Habsburgs in Austria, the Braganzas in Portugal, these rulers envied their Protestant counterparts, who had full control of their national churches. Why the reigning Roman Catholics wondered, should the Pope dictate religious practice in their countries when no one told the King of England how to run the Anglican Church in his? Interesting, this history. We'll continue next time on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening. Contact me by email, tom@seawaves.us. I'll see you tomorrow.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.